The fuck are you talking about, Sean?
Fuck off, man.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode some number of Lone Star Legacy, the podcast of the Lone Star Lurgoys. My name's Sam Craven. I'm currently drinking Miller Lite because I'm trying to lose weight. And today we're here to talk about Deathrite Shaman. Let me go ahead and introduce my other host before we get farther onto that. First off, Sean.
Hey there, my name is Sean. Never been on the podcast before, but been jamming Legacy with these guys for a while now. And yeah, they wanted to talk about Deathrite, so here I am, because I've got some strong opinions about that card.
Yeah, Patrick said that he wished he had recorded you talking the other day just because your rant was so excellent. He thought, we could just record that and put that out as a podcast.
Yeah, are we recording this?
Yes, we are broadcasting. We are broadcasting and recording.
Oh, shit.
Yeah.
Formal under pressure. Okay, well, I'll try to do a repeat performance of that then.
And Arjune, you want to introduce yourself?
This is my second time on the podcast. I've been playing Legacy for about 2 to 3 years now, and I also have some opinions on Deathrite Shaman, although admittedly I don't play it with the card a lot. And I'm currently drinking a diet iced tea because I'm also trying to lose weight.
Yep, all of that beer during Drunken Vintage really gets to you really fast.
Yeah,
a pussy wagon is like 120 calories.
Oh, yeah.
So the subject of today's podcast is Deathrite Shaman. The first thing I wanted to do before we got into any discussion was read the reason that Deathrite Shaman is banned in Modern, because I think it really speaks to why people think it should be banned in Legacy. It's kind of a very similar situation, so I'm just going to go ahead and read this. Different flavors of black-green decks have recently been among the best performing decks in Modern. That's more or less true. A lot of people aren't playing the green except for Deathrite. These decks play many very efficient ways to trade cards one-for-one with their opponents, such as Thoughtseize, Inquisition of Kozilek, and Abrupt Decay. Strong mana acceleration helps these decks trade one-for-one efficiently enough that they can keep up with other decks in a large format such as Modern. But normally, playing mana acceleration comes at the cost of playing cards that are less powerful in the late game. That is, by the way, a terribly constructed sentence. Deathrite Shaman, however, is powerful at all stages of the game. Having a strong attrition-based deck as a large portion of the metagame makes it difficult for decks that are based on synergies between cards instead of individually powerful cards. We believe that removing Deathrite Shaman from the format will leave more room for future innovation. So there's a lot to unpack there. Is there anything about that you think isn't really applicable to Legacy?
So I think the ideas that they have are pretty reasonable for the most part. I think in Legacy specifically, graveyards play a really important role, more so even than in Modern. And so the interactive part of Deathrite Shaman is actually very relevant, maybe more so even than the drain 2, or I'm sorry, than the lose 2 or gain 2 parts of the ability. And the removal of a card is sometimes much more relevant.
So you're almost saying that this description underestimates how good Deathrite Shaman is in Legacy.
In Legacy, I think so. Although, to be fair, like a lot of the removal is not like Inquisition, Thoughtseize, Abrupt Decay, but it's the same idea. In a format like Legacy where things happen very fast, 1 extra mana is much more valuable than a format like Standard or a format even like Modern where, yeah, mana is important and being ahead on it's great, but since in Legacy so many games are really played out in the first handful of turns, having even an extra 2 mana is a huge advantage. I'd say even more so than those other formats. And then if you have to go into like a grind mode, it's also quite good. I don't know. I think it's all the reasons they've listed and then maybe some more in Legacy.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with Arjune on that. I mean, sort of what they're talking about, I think from the beginning of that little reasons for ban paragraph, is they're talking about, like, you can go one-for-one with cards like Inquisition, Thoughtseize, and Abrupt Decay, and, like, yeah, absolutely, that's true in Legacy, too, but more importantly, of course, graveyard decks are more prevalent, or at least they sort of, like, live and die by being able to have, like, I think I'm thinking about, like, Reanimator-type decks and, like, Dredge and stuff.
There are both decks that require the graveyard and decks that heavily want their graveyard. So that
is a resource, right? That's
right.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, though, I think like one point that's a little bit understated is like, or I don't know if I should say understated, just hasn't been mentioned yet. Like tempo is a very real thing in Legacy. And I think it was definitely a lot more prevalent in the days of like Canadian Threshold, Rug Delver. But, games are won and lost by like the thinnest of margins, You have like Wastelands and Dazes firing on all fronts. Thalia is like having access to like that one more mana can like make or break a game. Whereas
Certainly.
like in Modern, I think it's definitely more of just like, it's good to accelerate, it's good to ramp, and it's good to like fix mana, but
like
I don't think go ahead.
What's the best thing you can do in Legacy for 2 mana? Go get a Batter Skull, which you don't put into play yet. Put out a Goyf. What's the best thing you can do for 3 mana? Put Grizzlebrand into play.
Like Grizzlebrand is there. Even like True Name and like Leovold, I think, are significantly better than like Stoneforge tutor up a Sophie or something.
And you also have, like you said, with Daze and Wasteland, you can play a Deathrite Shaman turn 1 and then either Wasteland or Daze, and you're still at 2 mana on your second turn.
Right.
Which, now that you've Dazed or Wasteland them, they're effectively not.
And Deathrite Shaman actually, this is kind of a little bit of a side note, but it plays so well with Wasteland because when you fire off a Wasteland, it also feeds 2 mana for the Deathrite Shaman itself. So you're up on mana and on tempo as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting because like at that point, your opponent kind of has to be playing Deathrite too, right? Otherwise, you've kind of just like you've put 2 lands in either graveyard for yourself to use, and if your opponent's not using Deathrite, like they have no way to contest you on those resources.
Well, or another mana producer. Like I think Noble Hierarch is also fine in that scenario. But yeah, I mean, you'd rather Deathrite.
Yeah.
But you're kind of talking about a thing that exists in Vintage, where sometimes when you thought seize your opponent or some other type of targeted discard, you don't want to take the best card because if they rip a Yawgmoth's Will, then that card just got even better. And in kind of a similar situation here, if you're playing against a Deathrite Shaman deck and you counter their spell, now there are 2 things in the graveyard for them to eat.
Yeah.
There's also those weird situations where it's like, I could like Ponder on turn 1, but my opponent went Underground Sea, Deathrite Shaman. I'm just going to sit on the special land and pass turn instead. And I guess if we're talking about like, we're talking about like unseen or like sort of like the minor corner cases of Deathrite. That's probably one of them. It's not as pronounced as fixing and ramping mana at the same time, but
when we get to the portion of this cast where I play Devil's Advocate, I'm going to tell you that Ponder is the wrong play there. So one of the first points we wanted to make was I had said in our discussion leading up to this podcast that I think any ban discussion, that is any discussion about banning a new card, not an unban or anything like that, but any discussion about banning a card that isn't about Brainstorm has to assume that Brainstorm won't be banned. And we kind of got off on a little rant, tangent, whatever. But Sean, you brought a really interesting point up about the difference between Brainstorm and Deathrite Shaman in terms of how they affect the format as a whole. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think like obviously both of them are really good cards. Apples and oranges, they're doing different things. Obviously, Deathrite Shaman is a fantastic way to play an early card that can like ramp you and fix your meta, as well as like be a late game threat with reach. I think Brainstorm is different in that it's like really good at like filtering draws and not necessarily providing card advantage or a clock or anything, but just the sheer consistency provided by Brainstorm is unrivaled by any other cantrip, especially when combined with like fetch lands. And tell me how you guys feel about this. This is something I've kind of been toying around with, I guess like a thought process, but like I was kind of thinking about this earlier today. It's like, what's the difference between like Brainstorm and Deathrite? Because people are very quick to like lump them together into like, sort of as you were saying, it's like, oh, well, like Brainstorm's still around, why should we ban Deathrite? And it's like, the 2 cards are different. How are they different? I think like Brainstorm is about creating consistency.
Well, I think the key is the word that you used was homogeneity and the different types of homogeneity they create.
Right. And so I think like Brainstorm is for like executing game plans and stuff. Storm, Sneak and Show, even like Rug Delver, they have like focused game plans, and Brainstorm is fantastic for helping you execute those focused game plans. Whereas Deathrite Shaman is like, homogeneity, sort of, I guess like, for those unfamiliar with the term, is just like uniform throughout is what the term means. And so like Deathrite decks tend to be sort of the same in that you can sort of use Deathrite for like these more fringy decks. Like I think like Food Chain and Alert and those kinds of decks would have a much harder time existing without Deathrite. But sort of what we're seeing Deathrite used for is just like these 4-color piles, for lack of a better term. I think check pile is a really big one.
I think what you're kind of saying here is Brainstorm locks you into playing blue, but there's a lot of ways to play blue. Deathrite Shaman locks you into playing a very particular kind of deck. So your Grixis, Bug, Check Pile, they're all playing very similar game plans. Whereas with Brainstorm, you could be Sneak and Show, Reanimator, Rug, Delver. You can do pretty much anything you want as long as you're playing blue.
Well, so here's the thing, though, because I think what ends up happening with Deathrite is you just find that the best way to play Deathrite is to play really greedy mana bases and the best cards in 4 different colors. And I think that's pretty evident with like these Bant Deathblade decks, you know, with 4 Noble Hierarchs, 4 Deathrites, Leovold, Swords, like Leovold and Stoneforge Mystic, I don't feel belong in the same deck. And to think this is a deck that has a favorable matchup against Death and Taxes, a deck with 4 Thalias, 4 Wastelands, 4 Rashadan Ports.
Yeah, yeah. What you're saying is they don't belong in the same deck. I mean, you're talking about 2 cards that combined cost 1 A, B, C, D mana.
No, that's
that's something that like in Vintage is pretty crazy.
Exactly.
with Moxen and Recall, that's a pretty crazy amount of mana to try to pay.
Yeah. So I don't know. Yeah, that's kind of what's like exactly. I think you probably said it better than I did. I'm not quite as eloquent as I'd like to be, but yeah, Brainstorm is definitely very good for like executing game plans and like filtering out your card draws very well. Whereas Deathrite Shaman, I think originally it was just used as like I don't want to say like a more fair card, but it was definitely
in Legacy or just like.
Okay, so I'm thinking about like pre-top banning. I didn't really have a problem with Deathrite. And it kind of got swept away by Terminus like everything else, but I also feel like the decks that incorporated Deathrite were like more focused in their game plans. They weren't just like good stuff.
They were things where it was a more traditional existing deck adding Deathrites. So like Bug, obviously adding Deathrite is good there.
Yeah.
You know, what was the name of the 4-color Deathblade, which is what I played that in a GP, was essentially Esper Blade with Deathrite Shamans making your mana base more inconsistent, but guaranteeing you a 10-turn win, basically.
Yeah, and I think like even those 2 decks are like very loose. Like they're very loose piles to fit Deathrite into. I think like some of the more focused ones are like, I think Elves is a fantastic deck for like Deathrite Shaman. You know, the synergy with that card is phenomenal. With all the untap effects, the fact that it has tribal synergy, it's fantastic there.
For whatever reason, this is much fairer. I mean, it is insanely good in Elves, especially when it's going off. But it seems like it's a lot fairer in some ways than in the blue shells, to me at least.
Right.
If nothing else, you're not feeding your own Deathrite nearly as much in Elves.
Sure.
Right. Yeah,
you're not dazing, brainstorming, pondering, and just guaranteeing that you're going to be able to activate the black ability in Elves.
Mm-hmm. No, for sure. And it's like you're playing. I don't know what the exact land count is in that deck, but you've got a couple of fetches, and then you're kind of just
like 18 or so. Yeah.
18 lands total.
Yeah.
What is like 2 Force, 2 Bayou, 4 Cradle, 2 Harbor,
like
and then like 8
maybe
fetches?
1 Pendlehaven, maybe 1 Cavern, and a bunch of fetches,
Yeah. Okay, but yeah, it's like not quite as many as like some other decks, and then like you kind of have to worry about. Yeah. Of course, you're not playing as many instant sorceries either.
Right, you're playing Natural Order, 3 or 4 Green Sun. Well, and Natural Order is even optional if you look at the decks that Julian plays. And Glimpse of Nature. So you're not feeding it. You've got to have them brainstorm and stuff.
And Zenith doesn't go into your yard anyway.
Yeah, and well, I mean that depends on your opponent, I guess.
Yeah.
But I think a lot more often you're using it as a mana burn. This is where if we were more prepared for the podcast, we might have deck lists for some of these decks from before Deathrite Shaman was printed.
So, to me, the biggest issue with Deathrite Shaman is that it's a black mana bird.
Yeah.
So I think green having access to Birds of Paradise effects is fine. I don't think people will get mad about Noble Hierarch or anything existing in the format. But the problem with Deathrite Shaman for me is that you can basically build a base black deck, and you can basically fetch Underground Sea and cast a Birds of Paradise.
And most of them are black base. They play 1, maybe 2 non-Deathrite green sources.
And usually
that was the question we asked in the chat. Is Deathrite Shaman as much as a problem if it costs G instead of B/G?
I would agree not. I mean, I think Deathrite Shaman still has a home in the bug kind of decks where you can still fetch Tropical Island, play Deathrite, so do those things. But it's kind of strange to me to see something like Grixis Delver, which is really, I mean, it may play 1 Tropical Island, but there's not really any green in there besides maybe an Abrupt Decay on the board, if that.
Yeah, I think like Ancient Grudge is all contemporary lists are playing. That's like
And what's interesting though is there were some decks when it was like I kind of said, where people were just jamming Deathrite Shaman into existing decks. There were a lot of like Esper Deathblade back in the day when that was a new deck. A lot of times it was an Esper deck with one tropical island. You switched up your fetches a little bit, but you had one green source and maybe a decay in the 75, and that was all of your green.
Yeah, exactly.
Just for eating Gristlebrands out of the yard or something.
Yeah.
Or just, prolonging how long you're living.
Yeah.
Yeah. Surprisingly good against Burn. Who knew? Also other Delver decks, but
yeah,
we digress.
Yeah, I think that's just the biggest issue with the card, honestly, is that the hybrid mana cost. That said, I do think there is a home for a 1-drop card that can interact with your opponent's graveyards and is also worth playing in a normal main deck setting. Because if it's too narrow, I don't really want it to compete with something like a Grafdigger's Cage, in the sideboard. Like, who cares about that?
Well, it needs to be something that's better than, say, Relic of Progenitus, which does see some main deck play in Modern. But all that does for you is draw a card other than Hate the Graveyard. Like so you're saying you want something worse than Grafdigger's Cage while being more usable in other situations.
Not necessarily worse, but good enough that you would consider to play it in main deck in Legacy, which is not a small feat anyway. I mean, there are very few cards that really fit that bill.
Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I guess there is design space, I think, for a 1-drop that can interact with your opponent's graveyards in a meaningful way. But I don't know if it's Deathrite Shaman or if that's really the best way to have that. That's all.
I think, here's the thing, though, and people kind of talk about, the running joke about that card is it is a 1-mana Planeswalker.
Yeah.
And that's sort of, it's not true, obviously, but at the same time, this card does so many different things. You're talking about, it ramps you, it gains you life, and it's, hates out your opponent's graveyard in addition to, being your clock. What kind of graveyard hate can compete with that?
Well, and on the note of 1-mana Planeswalker, if we call it a Planeswalker and we do a ranking of best Planeswalkers in Legacy, it's certainly in the top 5, possibly in the top 3.
I think it's number 1.
I think it's number 1 as well, yeah.
So I don't think that calling it a 1-mana Planeswalker is that much of an overstatement.
It doesn't feel goif, but other than that, it's just way too much flexibility for a 1-drop. Or more flexibility than any other 1-drop. I'll put it that way.
And it is, I think, by far the best creature in Legacy, and maybe the best. It's got to be one of the top 2 or 3 cards in Legacy. Maybe the best one. It's not, it's definitely up there.
It's one of those things that you have to contextualize. You can say it's the best creature in Legacy, but Ben's going to come in here and say Grizzlebrand.
Okay.
Grizzlebrand only cost 2 and a blue.
Yeah, or 1 and a black. Sometimes.
Yeah, so it is worth noting that these things are all very contextual.
Sure. But I think the Deathrite Shaman game plan is also flexible enough that you don't really ever feel bad, especially if you're playing it in a blue shell. You don't really feel bad ever dropping it on turn 1 and then seeing what your opponent does about it. It's a very proactive game plan that can also react very well to what your opponent is doing against a lot of axes that are relevant in Legacy.
Right. There's no opportunity costs, very little opportunity costs to just playing it on turn 1. And also there's very little opportunity cost. There's you're not losing a whole lot by just incorporating 4 copies of Deathrite. You don't have to warp the mana base or anything to fit that in.
You just have to basically play a fetch line mana base, but everyone's doing that anyway.
Yeah. So. Like I said, you have to shove a tropical island in.
Or Underground Sea is still fine too, right? That's the.
Well, I'm assuming you're playing Underground Sea because you're playing black and you're playing Legacy, which means you're playing blue.
Yeah, unless you're playing Elves, I guess that's the one.
There's your one. And you're already playing green and black in that deck, so perfect.
Hopefully you'll be okay mana-wise.
So Dan in the chat brings up an interesting point. He says, let's assume that they do want to ban Brainstorm or Deathrite Shaman or anything else for that matter from Legacy or Vintage. He says, I really don't think they'd do that right before Eternal Weekend, if at all. What do you think in terms of how timing affects a thing like this?
I think that does matter, especially for, I think only a handful of people in Wizards look at the banned restricted list in Legacy, and I think they usually try to do anything. 1, they won't really do anything that often anyway, but 2, they're only going to do something when there's kind of a lull in the scheduling. I think the top ban was in March, maybe, when there's really nothing until GP Vegas. That was about 2 or 3 months afterwards. So I don't think anything's going to happen on for Deathrite Shaman on this go around, but I think if it continues to be very strong and there's enough, player, complaints about it, we could maybe see some more action on it. I think it does matter though, for sure. They definitely don't want to warp formats before big events.
Major events. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, now that being said, this is going to feed into my next question. We're kind of going out of order. I apologize to y'all because y'all have the sheet, but it kind of depends what you think the purpose of an event like that is. And there are two reasons you might want to make a banning right before a big event. One, which we've seen in Modern, is to shake up the format. We've seen a ban explicitly in Modern to make the Pro Tour interesting. So if they want Eternal Weekend to be a premier event, that could be one of their pieces of reasoning is we want to see a new format on camera.
So I would argue that Pro Tours are vastly different from open events like GPs or Eternal Weekend in the fact that if you're a pro Magic player who's on the tour and Splendor Twin gets banned, okay, fine, you can go muster up the cards, play another deck. Modern's wide enough of a format that it shouldn't matter that much. Whereas I feel like for the average player, like if there was only one big Modern event or one or two big Modern events a year, they would seriously consider not doing anything until after it ended.
Sure. And I understand that the situations are different. Yeah. I just kind of wanted to point out there is precedence in that type of change.
Yeah, absolutely.
Aren't they on record saying though that like the Pro Tour is strictly for advertising purposes? Like before,
I think Morrow maybe somebody explicitly has now, like in the last year, said that it is the promotional tour, not the professional tour.
Right, and so I think like that's another reason why they'd want to shake that up. And obviously, Legacy's not. I mean, I don't know. People talk about it. Of course, Legacy's going to be in the Pro Tour with team constructed and stuff, but.
Yeah, that's another good point. Do they want a banning right beforehand? Right before Eternal Weekend would certainly raise awareness going into next year. With Pro Tour 25.
Well, when is constructed Pro Tour? Is it in the middle? Do you know what is the summer Pro Tour?
It's next year. I want to say it's August.
Yeah, so I think they still have a lot of time to, if they want to ban something, to do it next year before that Pro Tour happens, or even before. Right before
Eternal Weekend's coming up on us, but like from a personal point of view, I hate Deathrite Shaman. I think the card just needs to die in a fire, but we haven't given the meta enough time to shake out.
Well, so your first half of what you just said there is my second point, is that you can reach a point with, and we've seen this in other formats, where people are so depressed by the format that it starts to affect turnout. And one of the things you got to do with this BNR list is say, okay, do we want to make the change now and have things continue to get worse between now and the next time, or do we make a proactive change and say, look, turnout is going down, and maybe for Eternal Weekend, maybe just in general, say, it looks like it will continue to go down. Do we make a change now before it hits its low? Do we make now the low, basically?
So I would argue that Legacy also behaves differently from a format like Standard, where I think that was most prevalent, where Wizards kind of got cornered into making some bans to try and get attendance back up. I think in Legacy, most players are pretty aware of at least what the major cards in the format are. They know kind of what they expect going into those events, and honestly, if they want to play Legacy, they're going to go to the Legacy event. It's one of those formats where most players who enjoy playing Legacy aren't going to actively go play Standard or Modern or something, unless they're specifically doing something like getting pro points or something like that. So I think that if you're a Legacy enthusiast and you want to go play Legacy, the fact that Deathrite's in the format is not really going to be as big an impact as something like Standard, where the format sucks, but in 3 months you can get back on it if you want.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any of us really played Standard. Arjune might be the only one of us three who have.
I don't really play Standard. I just listen to Steven talk about it.
Sure, but like comparing Deathrite Shaman for all of our grievances compared to something like Aetherworks Marble, like I didn't play Standard at all. I've never played Standard.
Or Copter maybe.
Yeah, Copter as well. Those all just seemed like really, or like, Emrakul the Promised End. Those all seemed like really degenerate Standard metas.
There's another big difference that Legacy has with these other formats, which is Legacy has the ability to adjust to this a lot better. So if you ban Aetherworks Marvel and Standard, I got to go get a new deck. If you ban Deathrite Shaman, most of the Deathrite Shaman decks are still going to be playable to good minimum. Like, if you go like, oh, Grixis doesn't have Deathrite Shaman anymore. All of the cards in that are still good. Elves is still full of good cards. So that might be another reason that we might see a banning, is because they know that this ban, especially like Deathrite Shaman, is a much smaller adjustment than it might be in some other formats. And especially it's a smaller adjustment than, say, Survival of the Fittest, where you would be moving into a new deck.
Yeah, and the other thing about Legacy, and to a lesser extent Modern, is that you have a lot of tools to deal with problematic cards, or you have the tools to build decks that nullify the strategies that those problematic cards create. Or in a Standard, you really don't have very good answers. That's also part of the problem. Like, if I wanted to make a deck that gets Destroyed Delver or Destroyed Deathrite Shaman or something, I could do it in Legacy. In fact, many of those decks exist. It's
called Moonstompy.
Yeah.
All you got to do is not get forced or dazed on turn 1, and the game is over.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think you have a lot better ways to answer it. It's like, in Modern, Eldrazi is running everywhere until I gets banned, or Eldrazi Temple, but I guess in this case I. Whereas in Legacy, the Eldrazi deck comes up at the same time, plays 14 to 16 soul lands. And yeah, it has some good matchups, but I think it's pretty well contained by the format. Just, I think by virtue of having access to a lot of cards that are not available in other formats.
Can we back up a little bit though? Like, to talk about these like moon decks. Most recent MTGO challenge had 2 moon decks in the top 8, I want to say. Those Dragon Stompede style decks, just the mono red ones with chalices, soul lands, blood moons.
Mm-hmm.
You guys know what those look like.
Yeah.
This is like, I've said this before, but like, this is what you have to do to hate out these like non-basic mana bases.
And one thing I would point out, if you have 2 in the top 32, that's 1/16. That sounds like, one thing you got to keep in mind is most of the people are going to go in there with the default deck. So yeah, there were 6 or 8 Grixis in the top 32, but there were 100 in the event. How many moon decks were in the event?
Yeah, there were 15 Grixis in the top 32. I think 11 Control and 4 Delver, which is insane for other reasons, but yeah, you're absolutely right.
And from our knowledge of the format, we can say most likely 50% of the field was on something like that. But how many people were on Moonstompy?
Probably
couldn't have been that many, and 2 of them made top 32.
Yeah, conversion rate's much higher on that deck, but it's also, people aren't really preparing for that deck either.
Yeah.
Well, and that's okay. Here's the question. Let's play some devil's advocate. How are we beating Deathrite Shaman? What is the most underplayed card in Legacy, and why is it Blood Moon?
Yeah, yeah, fair.
Blood Moon. Okay, Blood Moon strikes me as like the nuclear option of non-basic hate. Like, that's basically what that is. It's like you just drop the atomic bomb of non-basic hate on your opponent. Turn 1, they're playing like a mana base of like Underground Seas and Misty Rainforest and Trop Islands and Bayous, and their deck just like only produces red at that point.
Unless they get Shaman out.
Yeah, I mean, like, unless they get Shaman
out. I mean, if I can for 3 mana just win the game, like, Blood Moon is better than Show and Tell in terms of just ending the game against a lot of decks.
Right. No, for sure. I definitely agree with you. Or like, even, I don't know what these decks play, but like at a point there were definitely decks that played like Cavern of Souls, Naming Human, into like Spear Guide, Lotus Petal, Magnus of the Moon. You know?
Yeah.
And it's like where Show and Tell can be countered, it's just like, oh, there's a Blood Moon.
Well, and I think where you see something like Blood Moon more than, say, Moonstompy, which is very specialized, is, for example, I'm playing Blue-White Miracles. Miracles and Counterbalance top decks have historically very often splashed red for like 2 Blood Moons somewhere in the 75, because it's just really good when you only play, you're playing 2-ish colors. When you're playing 2-ish colors, being able to completely shut down non-basics doesn't hurt you and just destroys so much of the format.
Right.
Yeah.
But like, here's the thing though. Like, compare that to Death and Taxes, right? And I kind of want to talk about like the top decks in the format right now. I think like no one's going to say there is a best deck or second best deck, or like, but there's like, I think decidedly a top tier that has both Check Pile and Grixis Delver.
But I mean, as I've called it in our group chat, those aren't 2 decks. That's 1 deck. It's Grixis and Grixis Green.
Yeah.
Okay. And the difference is,
I would probably add Deathblade in there as well, or Pan Deathblade.
So the top decks on the source, which are due to be updated soon, is Red Green Lands, Death and Taxes, Check Pile, Grixis Tempo, Blade Control, and Sneak and Show. And Blade Control there is extremely generic. That could be with Deathrite Shaman, that could be Blue-White.
Sure. I think Blade Control's a bit of a toss-up, but out of those decks, I think the hardest one Death and Taxes should have a problem against, like the most difficult matchup for them should probably be like Red Green Lands.
And that's a good matchup for them at this point.
Yeah, like slightly favored in Grixis, slightly favored for Death and Taxes.
Yeah.
But then here's the thing, though. I actually think Check Pile is not a good matchup for them.
For Death and Taxes?
Like the 4-color deck? Yeah. It's like the 4-color deck should have a bad matchup against Death and Taxes. I don't think they actually do.
I mean, the 4-color deck should have a bad matchup against anything with 4-port, 4-wasteland.
But I don't think they do.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, because like you have these Deathrite Shaman decks that enable decks that can play Leovold and like
you go
Polygon's Command untaps.
I mean, you go. I'll play my land, play a Deathrite Shaman. You play your land, which destroys my land. I'm coming out way ahead in that situation.
Right.
Oh yeah.
I mean, if I play 4 Deathrite Shamans and never have a land in play, I mean, Death and Tax is better if opened with an Aether Vial.
Right, and the deck also Check Pile is also playing 2 basic lands. Like, you can't wasteland those. I don't think Death and Taxes is playing Ghost Quarter unless it's like for budget reasons.
Well, there's Arbiter Taxes. That's like not a real deck.
Okay.
There are some people who are playing it because it's almost as good as Wasteland, and the search is almost never relevant.
A lot of the time, and it becomes strip mine a lot of the time too.
Yeah, and you can get basics.
I think decks that actually play both Wasteland and Ghost Quarter are pretty underrated in the format because it makes serious problems against fetch line mana bases.
So
I mean, that's what Red Green Lens is doing, right? Red Green Lens is playing like anywhere from like 1 to 4 Ghost Quarters now, and it's just so they can recur those and just run people out of basics.
Well, yeah, that's what
I've done that against. I've won a game against Death and Taxes by just 2 Ghost Quarters a turn.
Yeah. Well, so I think the original issue is that online ports are just so expensive that Death and Taxes and traditional
more than Black Lotus.
Yeah, most expensive card I think online.
Mm-hmm.
Oh boy.
So I think it's like 150 or something. I have no idea what the price is right now.
So going back to how I got here, I said, "What's the most underplayed card?" And then I kind of pushed us into Blood Moon being the answer to that. What is it that people aren't doing that they should be doing? That maybe this is our fault for not addressing the problem. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who, instead of trying to beat Deathrite Shaman, they just say, I'll join them. What is it people aren't doing that or need to be doing that really helps solve this problem from a I don't want to play Deathrite Shaman perspective?
Moonstompy?
I don't even mean decks or anything like that. I mean, like, for example, it has been a thing since, I mean, we can probably find Google results back to 97 or earlier, that you always bolt the bird. I would estimate the plurality of my Swords to Plowshares in Miracles are directed at Deathrite Shaman. And are people underestimating it and not using the removal enough? Is that a thing that needs to happen?
Removal in Legacy is just so hard because it's so dead in so many matchups. It's hard to commit like 8 spots to removal compared to like Modern or something.
They go turn 1 Deathrite, you go turn 1 Bolt, push, Swords to Plowshares.
You're breaking even.
You guys come out even on mana. Yeah, you guys break even on mana.
Well, it's not a way to I would argue that you don't, because across 10 turns, Deathrite Shaman in a land is 19 mana, right? Ish. I mean, depending on fetches and all that. So you break even this turn. Next turn, they would have gone ahead. And besides that, a lot of people are probably going to go turn 1 Deathrite Shaman regardless of better things in their hand because it sets them up for the 3 mana next turn.
So I think the problem with that is, like, yeah, obviously we understand sort of the mantra of like Bolt the Birds. They developed the game in a really big way that, you don't necessarily see if you're not like as experienced with the format or whatever. What if you don't have the Bolt? The games where they do have the Deathrite and you do not have the Bolt are like a night and day difference from like they have the Deathrite, you have the Bolt. I think you guys are still pretty on par at that point.
Well, Sean, what you need to do is just be way luckier.
Oh god. Did I tell you guys my latest foray was a complete disaster? It was Infect with 4 Swords main deck, 4 Stifles, and 4 Wastelands. And I just wanted to play Rock Delver, but I do not own Tarmogoyfs. And so I just had to temporarily.
You want glyphs? Yo, Sean, we have miscut glyphs for you.
I also want to play Tarmogoyfs. I refuse to play Tarmogoyfs on principle, but maybe I'll change that. I don't know.
Yeah, Sean, I'd like to see you just play 4 Pithing Needle main deck.
That's what what's his face used to do.
When Survival
Ken Smolinski.
When Survival was at its peak, I played 2 Pithing Needle in the main, 2 in the side. Pithing Needle's a generally good card, And just like in the blind, naming survival was like okay. And sometimes you'd just be like, you've got to fetch out Pithing Needle. Do you want to fetch or not? Oh, I will just fuck you with your Misty Rainforest then.
So I know you're joking about this, but to explain to anyone who's watching this and is considering doing this, the reason this is a bad idea is because Brainstorm and Fetch lands exist in the format. And so if your opponent's not running a sort of artifact removal like main deck, they'll go turn one, like, for example, you're not playing like any sort of artifact removal. I slam a turn one Needle against you, naming Deathrite. You have a Fetch land, a Brainstorm, and a Deathrite in your hand. You just shuffle that shit away.
Sure.
And you don't need it to win the game.
I'm obviously kind of joking here.
Right.
I don't think if you get to the point that you are main decking an answer to a single card, that is a problem.
Right. It's like it's not even like.
And if you want proof of that,
it's flexible.
Zoo once played 4 Mental Missteps.
Oh, good lord!
And it played 4 Mental Missteps to counter Mental Misstep. When you're at the point that you are playing cards specifically for one card, that becomes a problem.
I'd agree with that.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of harkens back to like one of the big problems with Deathrite Shaman is like it is hate for like graveyards, but it is very good at other things too. Like even if your opponent's not utilizing the graveyard at all, it's still very, very good. But then against like Reanimator and Dredge, it suddenly becomes this haymaker that everyone's main decking because it's really good for other reasons.
Now, I will say, in tournaments where it doesn't matter, I love playing Reanimator, Tin Fins, things of that nature against Deathrite Shaman because it's like a very cerebral match. It's like, I gotta trick you into eating my Brainstorm, or I gotta get 2 or maybe even 3 things into the yard and cast an untargeted reanimation spell or something like that. And I will say, from the mental point of playing a game, not the trying to win point, that is kind of enjoyable. But that is not the thing I want to be doing at Eternal Weekend when I've spent $60 to get into the tournament, to say nothing of getting to Pittsburgh.
I think that's very similar to like how people used to play around Counterbalance, right? I loved playing around Counterbalance, you know? And
it was so fun to just feed spells into their Counterbalance, wait till they exhaust themselves, be like, here's my Haymaker.
Right, exactly. And I thought that was like one of the most rewarding parts about Magic. That being said, that deck was obviously way too good. Having to play against that at like a tournament, you know, as you said, flying out to Pittsburgh, play against that like 8 out of 9 rounds or something, and it's just the best deck in the format. Yeah, it's not something I want to deal with. I definitely feel disadvantaged at that point of not playing Miracles.
Yeah, I agree. So
Miracles can't catch a break. We are still shitting on this deck.
Yeah, although I will say
I've been doing really well with it.
Oh yeah, no. I was actually listening to the. Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah. Go ahead.
I played against it 4 games, and I have no feelings about that deck. But it's way easier without Counterbalance to play Storm.
I used to have feelings about Miracles. I was listening to our "What the Meta Looks Like in a Topless World" podcast that you guys did way back, and
we probably all should have listened to that for homework.
It was good. It was a good podcast. But Sam Craven is on record saying he absolutely despises the new Miracles deck.
I don't think I despise the new Miracles deck. I despise the ban. Let's not go off on a rant. But as an example of how strong Deathrite Shaman is, it is one of the most problematic cards for the new Miracles deck. I can post in the show notes my deck list, but I'm playing blue-white, just a lot of hate. I've got 2 moats, which shuts down most decks. But Deathrite Shaman is a huge problem for me, and a lot of times it's like, if I don't have a sweeper, do I sword say a Termagoyf, which is fucking huge and going to end my game soon, or do I swords the Deathrite Shaman, which is definitely going to end the game no matter what I do? And a lot of times I think Deathrite Shaman's the answer.
Yep.
Yeah. You want to get into talk about like Snapcaster mages and stuff too, like.
Oh, no. I think swords. I play against a shocking number of people that I'm like Snapcaster and like, yeah, I'm like target Brainstorm, like, yeah, I'm like cast Brainstorm, they're like, yeah, I'm like,
all right.
Yeah. I mean, there was somebody the other day that like at a real event for money, I was like, no, do that, and he was like, well, I'm like, do that in response, and he was like, oh yeah.
But then did they end up turning through the Breach Emrakul? Because
no, it was something like I'm like Snapcaster, like, yeah, swords to plowshares, yeah, cast swords targeting Deathrite Shaman. They're like, I guess in response I'll eat a Brainstorm.
Yeah, that's a pretty nice aspect of Deathrite Shaman, actually. I think. like you don't have to activate it every turn. You can just use it to pin down a Snapcaster Mage in someone's hand.
That's another thing I think is really fun is the face off of Deathrite v Deathrite.
Oh yeah, it's just
like you never activate Deathrite first, right?
Well, no. Sometimes you do it at the end of their turn, so they have to use it on their turn, and then you can untap with it.
Or if you've got two, that's always fun.
Oh yeah, if you're ahead on Deathrites, it doesn't matter, right? You just yeah. So,
you just activate it twice.
So I'll say while we were sitting here talking, I was thinking, what are people not doing enough from the removal? People aren't playing enough removal. I'm like, I know, perfect. Just play Punishing Fire because you can play it over and over again. What decks play Punishing Fire? Lands, which is fine. And Jun. Oh wait, Jun plays Deathrite Shaman.
Oh no! What about the Rug Waterfalls? I think plays Punishing Fire.
Oh, Rug Waterfalls. That was Rug with Shardless Agent and
Blood Elf.
And Blood Elf. Yeah,
Guided Passage deck.
Yeah.
Yes, Guided Passage. Yeah.
I tried to build that deck for a while, but Shardless Agents were really expensive at the time.
Yeah,
I want to build that like right now.
Yeah, the deck definitely plays Deathrite Shaman
for that deck. Yeah.
That deck now would not be Rug Waterfalls. That deck would be Bug Cascade with Lightning Bolt.
Yeah.
Ugh. I still think Grub should catch on as like a deck.
Yeah, I think it should.
Name. Yeah, Grub.
Grubbed over.
Okay, so pause for a second here.
Yes.
I kind of want to talk about something else because I think we've been kind of unfair to Deathrite at this point, and
yeah, sure.
We all. I think it's like pretty evident where we all stand. But I think what's also important is to like note that a lot of people, and I think we're in the minority when we talk about Deathrite, like, should it receive a ban? I definitely think it should, and I think you guys are probably leaning towards yes as well.
Well, I have some reservations. I'm happy to talk about it whenever.
Yeah, I think this is a good place to go for it.
Okay. So I don't really like Deathrite Shaman. I think it's probably too powerful for its mana cost. But my problem is if you ban Deathrite Shaman, I'm a little bit scared of a deck like Blue-Black Reanimator actually becoming fantastic in the format. And it's something that people didn't really think about a year ago because that deck was bad against Deathrite Shaman decks and not particularly great against Miracles. But without both of those gone, I don't know if people remember, but like I think that deck has a pretty good Rug Delver matchup. It's pretty good against the non-Deathrite Delvers, and it's better. It's good against it's good against the other combo decks, and it's fine against lands. I think it's unfavorable, but still not horrible.
I mean, I played that deck extensively. You need 2 mana to win the game, so yeah, exactly. Lands is not that much of a problem.
Yeah, unless they can like get a Crocus out or something, you don't have ties to that time, whatever. But without Deathrite Shaman, I think that deck actually has a lot. Like that becomes kind of the unchecked best deck in the format that people aren't really thinking about at the moment. The fact that there's a 1-mana creature that's like played a lot that interacts with your opponent, the creatures in your opponent's graveyard, is actually really relevant. You're
kind of in Vintage. This is called the Dredge Gambit. Do you carry hate or not, and just hope to not play Dredge. When I started playing Legacy through, I guess really through RTR block, it was you packed 3 to 5 pieces minimum of graveyard hate for Reanimator, Dredge, which was a much more real deck at the time, and you don't really have to do that anymore. That's a thing I had not thought about.
In Vintage's Dredge just not that good anymore? Like, is it still a playable deck in the format?
So the short version is I and a lot of other people believe that Dredge is a cycle. Dredge is really good. People bring a lot more Dredge hate. Dredge becomes very bad because there's a lot of Dredge hate.
Sure.
People stop bringing Dredge hate because Dredge is really bad. Dredge becomes very good.
Yeah.
So Dredge is cyclical. I don't think it's ever a bad thing to bring to a tournament. I think right now it's probably an excellent thing to bring to a tournament.
That's kind of what Dredge was in Legacy, though, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. It was very much the same. The Gambit. Do you just hope to not hit Dredge?
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of the Deathrite Shaman decks just nullify that strategy pretty effectively too.
And I think we're all packing hate for Black-Red Reanimator as well, because no one ever wants to lose to that deck.
Yeah,
I think our local meta is so fucked. I don't even think about that.
I mean, I think Blue-Black is better in the format if Deathrite is gone, just because it can protect itself a little bit better, and also have a proactive game plan. But yeah, sure, any flavor of Reanimator, I'd say.
So, question for you guys, and this is more of like personal preference, though.
Yeah.
Would you like between having a Reanimator style deck as like the top deck of the format versus one of these many Grixis shells, Delver, check pile, 4 3.5 color control? Like, what do you guys prefer personally?
I would say I find the games that I play against these Grixis decks incredibly boring, even when I win. I don't like winning those games. Winning those games isn't fun because it's just going to grind you out. Turns out that when I play Future Sight and draw 5 cards a turn, I make more card advantage than you. By the way, Future Sight Miracles, check it out.
Future Sight is no, it's real. It's real. I've definitely seen you win games off of that card.
Yeah, I actually prefer the Deathrite Shaman games, but I also just mainly play combo, so Reanimator is just awful anyway.
And I feel like I think that this Reanimator point you bring up is really interesting because if you give me the option between Reanimator being the best deck and I guess Deathrite Shaman being the best deck, I would choose Reanimator for a couple reasons. First of all, when you're reanimating shit, you feel like a powerful wizard. And like when you get crushed by Reanimator, you're like, dude, my opponent is some wacky shit. Instead of my opponent took 30 minutes to kill me 2 points at a time. and the other thing is, Reanimator you can beat with a single Force of Will. Frequently, you can beat Reanimator by having Force of Will blue card in hand. That is absolutely not the case with any of these Deathrite Shaman decks.
Yeah, I mean, I think like just because the threats are like so, like their threat suite is so diverse, they really just have answers to everything. Especially in the way of like these Delver decks, you know, like Daze and Force of Will are strong, unconditional answers to most things in the format.
Well, and I mean, against like a Grixis type deck, you're like force a Deathrite Shaman, which I will do because if they're playing Deathrite Shaman, that's the most powerful spell they're going to be playing. Might as well hit it with Force of Will. And like they follow up with like Young Pyromancer or Termagwaif, and like Termagwaif is now minimum a 2/3. There's probably a fetch that's a 3/4. That's an awesome follow up. You Force of Will or Reanimate. That's probably the end of their turn and maybe even the next couple turns.
Right.
You can very much still play a game of Magic against a Reanimator deck attempting to go off.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean,
I wouldn't want to live in a world where like 30% of the format is like Reanimator decks, though. Either, honestly.
Yeah. You know, I own 8 Grizzle brands, so I'm totally cool with it.
I don't know. That was just the one thing I was thinking about is if the card's actually not in the format, it's not like we all go back to just playing super fair or combo decks.
Oh, you know what else? Between now and Eternal Weekend, Magus of the Mind.
What's that card do?
Is it the Mind's Desire one?
It's a Mind's Desire Magus. It's blue and tap for Mind's Desire.
Let's do it. It's not legendary this.
Why does Wizards keep printing my favorite spells on creatures? Like,
we've
so tired of this.
The Tinfin Slack is very much into this plan of we're going to play Tinfins with 4 Mind's Desire. Because what's better than Storm 100? Mind's Desire and Storm 100. Mind's Desire into Mind's Desire.
Oh my lord.
But this one you only can shuffle your library once. It's very unfortunate.
Well, that's because Mystical Tutor doesn't exist in this format.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, we're on the question of would you prefer Deathrite Shaman, not just a banning, but would you prefer the before or after?
Yeah, I think this is and like just a little bit of like background. I think this is really important because like it really colors a lot of our perspectives. You know, like I think it's important for anybody listening to know like how do you feel about Deathrite Shaman? I'll tell you, like, for anybody who doesn't know, I played Infect for like 3 years. I think Infect is unplayable in this meta. I think it's just in the worst place it's been in a long time, and so I think it's not really a surprise that I would want Deathrite Shaman banned. But, you know, in the interest of full disclosure, I think everyone needs to know that.
It's, to me, very similar to the argument that you shouldn't ban Top because Top helps all these other decks. I think Deathrite Shaman is really interesting in things like Deathblight. I think Deathblight is... I can go on a whole thing about how I think Deathblight is a super interesting deck. But the other Deathrite Shaman decks are just fucking miserable.
I do not like 4-color piles and decks that are predominantly black that feature, like as you said, 1 tropical island for the sake of hating on graveyards.
Yeah.
Oh, and even just 1 tropical island for, I mean, you've got it.
Yeah, until the life game comes up too. Just if you're racing or something.
And then if, I mean, you're playing 3 colors, the life gain might help you cast what's that fucking shitty 3-mana spell that costs you life? And
Painful Truth.
Yeah, Painful Truth. I own 0 of that card.
It is like what 25 cents, and I also own 0.
I also own 0 0 Fatal Push because I refuse to pay $8 for standard card.
I bought mine for 6, and then I realized I would never play this in any deck ever.
I'm going to FNM in September, and I'm drafting all of the best cards in the pack and dropping.
You're the kind of person Wizards is trying to dissuade from going to FNM, Sam.
Well, then they should ship the FNM promo to my fucking apartment.
Yeah. So, in my ideal world, I think they'd do like a ban and replace on Deathrite Shaman. Like I would be okay with it if it costs just green mana, not black.
So a power level errata.
Yeah. So let's make it a 1/1 because there's no reason that card should be a 1/2.
Well, you know,
or an 0/1 even.
That being said, the 2 is when is the 2 relevant? Combat.
Delver and Goblin Lackey, but no, because block.
So combat, it's not relevant, and most of the time, if they're trying to use it as a planeswalker, it's not relevant.
No, it absolutely is relevant.
But it blocks and it activates at the end of turn. Like you just hold up a blocker, and I mean goblins isn't a deck.
Okay. Okay. As a block, that's a thing I had not considered.
Yeah.
So
you did way more homework than me, and you also didn't just pour like a giant thing of rum. So.
That's true.
I'm handicapped.
So I think they may be okay as a 1/1. I think it'd be fine as an 0/1. I don't want to have 2 toughness. Yeah, whatever.
Do you guys know why it's a 1/2? Like the apocryphal story?
Because fuck yourself.
So originally there was like an Innistrad and Ravnica standard, and they kind of had the idea. They knew that spirits were going to be really, really good.
Yeah.
In Innistrad standard, and so they printed whatever 5 mana curses.
Well, I thought Deathrite Shaman was specifically printed to combat Lingering Souls in Standard. That was the reason they actually printed that card.
Has Wizards ever intentionally printed an answer that didn't just completely shit on things?
Abrupt Decay was really good for counterbalance. Thank my lucky stars that card existed.
I was going to use the example of Mental Misstep.
Oh, yeah.
No. Oof. Disaster. No, but the reason Deathrite is 2 toughness is because of that 5 mana curse that gives all of your opponent's creatures -1/-1.
Did that ever see play?
I don't know.
The blue-black control deck did play it.
But your Deathrite can survive through that, so you get to thank whoever came up with that one.
Yeah.
Okay, so the short answer, would I prefer a format with or without Deathrite Shaman? I think I'd prefer it without Deathrite Shaman. That being said, and I know this doesn't make sense, I'm still on the don't ban it train.
Yeah.
Arjune, ban or no?
I think right now, no, but I would rather have a format without it, I think. But yeah, I'm also on the no ban for now. Although if I keep on seeing Grixis Delver be like half the metagame, I would consider doing something about it.
Sean?
Definitely not ban as well. Same reasons as you guys.
Yeah.
The legacy metagame just moves so slowly these days with like
that's a whole point I wanted to bring up is I feel like Legacy has very much suffered from the Star City circuit not doing Legacy a lot because there's not as much impetus to innovate. Instead of, maybe you see something wacky in the first couple rounds, go, I want to try that out, like Mono Blue Martyr, which, by the way, go watch that video again. It's awesome. It's so good.
Greg Hatch is an American hero. I love it.
I played against Martyr at Louisville, and this guy was like, we were sideboarding. This guy was like, yeah, I'm playing this because no one knows how to beat it. And I was like, oh, I know exactly how this deck works. But I think because there's less impetus to try to beat it, there's a lot more don't beat them, join them. And maybe that's a thing that can be turned around at Eternal Weekend, which will be a big streamed event.
Yeah, I think online results also kind of skew it quite a bit because there's much more Grixis Delver online.
Well, and I think online kind of fits into my point too. Like, if I play Mono Blue Martyr and I get on camera at Star City, a lot of people are going to see that. They're going to get to watch the game, go, wow, that was really cool. If I top 32 with Mono Blue Martyr now, which is not going to happen, but that type of deck is what I mean.
Yeah.
All people are going to see is that's a weird deck in the top 32. And that's the amount of thought most people are going to put into it. So I really think that I'm sure there are people trying to specifically beat the meta. I think in general, most people aren't. I think people are trying to either just be good at their deck and win that way, or they're playing the deck that's the best.
Well, one other thing is a lot of the Deathrite Shaman decks are very user-friendly for players who are getting into Legacy starting out, because a lot of times they're just playing creatures and using combat, and they're still playing removal and counter spells and things that are very familiar and standard and modern, compared to like playing something like Storm, which is just, you're kind of talking about when we run Vintage. A lot of times we have new players who just ask me to hand them a deck, and I have to explain all these synergies with a Deathrite Shaman deck.
You can just be like,
Yeah,
just
exactly.
read the cards, and you will understand how this deck works.
Yeah, and
I will say
they're playing an intuitive game plan, I think. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's all.
Well, I mean, that's one thing I will say about Deathrite Shaman decks, and sort of the segue from like Modern to Legacy. Shardless for the longest time just like made the most sense to everybody, you know, and that was kind of the deck you just handed someone who just started like from playing Modern. They're just like, wow, this deck is so good. You guys have Ancestral Visions and like Shardless Agent, like that's incredible. You have Deathrite Shamans and Tarmogoyfs and Brainstorms.
3 mana for a 2/2 and a recall.
Yeah,
It seems pretty darn good compared to like I think playing against, and this is like one of the biggest reasons I didn't like. A little bit off topic. One of the biggest reasons I didn't like Miracles was like the deck was completely unintuitive to like play against. You had to like specifically know.
You had to have played against it. Yeah,
exactly.
It felt awful. As a guy, I mean, I played countertop decks since 2009. It felt bad to play against people who didn't know what the deck was because a lot of times you would like counter 3 or 4 things before they went, oh, now I understand that I can't cast spells.
Right.
That being said, I was once beat with a standard deck playing what was then the current version of countertop. It was when Primeval Titan was in standard, and the dude played Primeval Titan and goes, "Do you want to reveal?" I was like, "No, I'm good." Because this was before Terminus was printed. There were 0 6s in my deck.
You want to play Mike?
This is fucking stupid.
What are you doing?
So we've danced around this a lot. This is a thing that Sean, I believe, put on our notes. What is the purpose of the Legacy ban list? And the follow-up is, it is not explicitly stated by WotC. I believe that's correct. I didn't do any investigation of that. And it seems like it means different things to everyone.
If it is explicitly stated, I was not able to find it. As an aside, I spent 40 minutes today looking for the next banned and restricted date, banned and restricted announcement date. And
see, here's the thing. The BNR, that information would be posted on the internet. And the internet is technology. And technology and wizards are like oil and water. And I think that's actually a quote from a Terry Pratchett book.
That's funny. Yeah, so in terms of what I think the Legacy ban list is I don't want to be in a situation in Legacy where if the goal is to win matches, you are kind of stuck playing one archetype or one deck. So in that regard, I am okay with the top ban because it seems to me like if you were actually really competitive and wanted to actually win these events and presumably had enough skill, you would just play Miracles. And that
you would either play Miracles or be prepared to beat Miracles.
Yeah, exactly.
You had to be one of those two.
Right, exactly. So I would like to see the format, and I don't want to make it sound like modern, but I want to see enough diversity that you can play kind of what you want to and still be competitive, which is, I think, true for a lot of Legacy decks. So
to clarify from the original question, what is the purpose? Are you saying the purpose is to ensure diversity?
I think that's a big part of it.
So then the follow-up question would be, and I'm cutting you off because you're going to get into all the things I'm asking you.
Yeah, sure.
What does diversity mean? Because, and I'll give 2 reasons. One, a lot of people would say if you go purely by deck name, Grixis and Check Pile are completely different decks. WotC recently came up with a change to the way that they release deck lists online for the MTGO stuff, where decks have to be 10 cards different. Is that sufficiently diverse? What exactly does diversity mean? Now, I'll say 10 cards different doesn't mean shit in Legacy. You can just change your fetch suite and be like 6 cards different.
Oh, yeah, easily.
But if
Delver or something where...
If the purpose is to ensure diversity, what do you mean by diversity? An old wooden ship? Yeah, old reference. Yeah. Somebody got it.
No, so I guess it's a little bit hard to quantify, but I want to be in a situation where you can play one of several decks that attack the format from different axes. So in some regards, I'm happy with some number of tempo decks existing. Even the different Delver decks can play out quite differently, like Bug and Grixis Delver.
Pause for a second, though.
Yeah.
Do tempo decks still exist outside of Grixis Delver? Half of
Rug Delver is really bad.
I don't even think that was a tempo deck. I think that was more of a mid-rangey deck, right? I don't know. You can kind of split hairs on that one, but yeah.
I think traditionally you take the Rug Delver where everyone played the same 56. I think that was a tempo deck.
Yeah.
You're right. We're getting into splitting hairs again.
Right, but I think tempo is dead for what that's worth. outside of Grixis Delver playing 3 ciphers.
So I'll say, I think a good definition of diversity is not diversity of decks, not diversity of cards, but diversity of I had a good word, and then we were talking and I lost it. The diversity of strategy. So like the strategy of Grixis and Check Pile and kind of Bug kind of fits in there are all basically the same. So we look at the sources list of decks to beat, and we've got 5 decks there, but 2 of those, Check Pile and Grixis Tempo, are essentially the same deck. And if Blade Control is the Deathrite Shaman build, you might even argue that that fits into it too. And when you do that, you're down to 3 decks.
Yeah.
So if diversity of strategy is the goal, then I think a Deathrite ban becomes obvious.
So I think, yeah, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, sure. If you think of it that way, that's certainly the case. But I think the other side of the coin is that what do you enable with the banning of that card? And I think that's something that people don't really think about too much when they say, "Oh, X card should be banned," just in general. So I do have some reservations about what becomes good and what maybe becomes like a tier 0 deck.
Well, it's really interesting. This is a central argument in Vintage right now, is that a lot of people want a ban that is specifically there to force people to play other cards to fix another perceived problem. A lot of people think that one of the solutions to Workshop is to restrict missteps, so you have to play cards that are live against Workshop. So, and that's a point, like you say, most people I think in Legacy aren't thinking about it. In Vintage, people are very keenly aware of it, but it's what fills that void is the thing you have to think about. Do
you think there's like a Legacy analog for that then? Or is this just something like you're kind of bringing up as like...
I'm bringing up as an example of, I agree that people in Legacy aren't thinking about it, but it's interesting that in Vintage, it is the exact opposite. People are laser focused on that. But yeah, and I totally agree with you. There's many differences between Legacy and Vintage.
Sure.
Oh, for sure.
Sean, pose the question to you. What is the purpose of the Legacy ban list?
Purpose of Legacy ban list, I think some of the more major things are like metagame diversity. They've kind of stated, like, what did they cite? Like, when Blue-Red Delver was the top deck, they said it was like over, I want to say like 28% of the meta.
That would have been the ban and restricted update after GP Jersey 2014.
Right, whenever Cons was.
Blue-Red Delver was one more everywhere, and it wasn't just Blue-Red Delver. That was the Treasure Cruise Dig Through Time restriction.
Yeah. Right. What were they banned at the same time? I thought they were banned separately. Like Cruise was first, then Dig was there.
I believe they were banned at the same time in Legacy, but restricted at separate times in Vintage. That seems like easily Googleable information.
I thought Cruise
they were banned at separate times.
And then Dig kind of lasted, and Omnitel was just bonkers as shit.
Right. Mono Blue Omnitel was the deck to be after Treasure Cruise got banned in Legacy.
That was the thing that led to a lot of jokes in Vintage, was that people didn't realize that Dig Through Time was by far the better card until it was the one you could play. Let's see. January 2015, Dig Through Time and Treasure Cruise banned in Modern. Treasure Cruise banned in Legacy. Treasure Cruise banned in Vintage. Then March, no Legacy or Vintage ban. Then September, Dig Through Time banned in Legacy, restricted in Vintage, alongside Chalice of the Void in Vintage. So you're right. It was banned separately. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dig Through Time was really good in that deck. But to answer your question, staying a little bit off topic, I mean, obviously, I think it's the purpose of the Legacy ban list is to keep metagame shares relatively equal, and I think you put it best when you said between strategies, and people sort of make the argument about Brainstorm about like how there's not enough color diversity. I don't think color diversity like you can look at it.
I don't think color diversity is. I don't think, as a guy, I've played Legacy and Vintage for coming close to 10 years now. I don't think color diversity is a thing that's possible without massive sweeping bans. You can ban Brainstorm, Ponder, and Preordain take its place, no problem. You can you can restrict Preordain, no problem. I think that color diversity is not a thing that is possible, and that probably goes back as far as like Onslaught block when Brainstorm Fetch became a thing.
I don't think it's possible, but at the same time, I don't think it's necessary.
I don't think it's not a good metric to judge how diverse.
Right,
but it's like you said, you can play anything with Brainstorm. Now, you do have to be playing Brainstorm to play with Brainstorm, but you can play a blue-white control deck. You can play blue-red Delver. You can play Storm. You can play Esper. You have many options, which you don't really have strategically with Deathrite Shaman.
Mm-hmm. Brainstorm helps build like consistency. Is like what's at the heart of it, and I think that's like, yeah, you can kind of make the argument that Brainstorm is the most played card in Legacy or whatever. And I'm sure there are people who will eventually listen to this that disagree with us and think Brainstorm should be banned, but I definitely don't see a problem with it.
I think from a purely statistical point of view, Brainstorm should have been banned. Like it's not. It should be banned. Right. It should have been banned. I mean, the stat that Ned Leeds, Sean O'Brien likes to cite is GP Kyoto, which is now 2 years in the past. 32 for 32, top 8 Brainstorm, and that's why when I said this was one of our first points we went over. You have to assume Brainstorm won't be banned in any discussion about the banned restricted list in Legacy. Is if they're not going to ban it when it's 32 for 32, they're not going to ban it. Let's talk about the next thing.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, the format's definitely warped around Brainstorm, but I would actually argue that Brainstorm probably makes for better, like more enjoyable games, though, too. Because I think the consistency level of Legacy decks is just through the roof compared to something like Modern.
And I talked a little bit about the kind of the cerebral enjoyment of some decks. And Brainstorm, like, I love playing Brainstorm against people who don't know how to fucking brainstorm. It's a lot of fun to be like, I am just better at you than this game because you aren't playing this right.
I also enjoy playing Storm against Brainstorms too. I think it's like a very fun and interactive.
You've thought seized them. They brainstorm. You gotta go. Okay, what 3 cards could they have?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. Yeah, or like Cabal Therapy or something. Yeah, and the interaction is great. I don't know, whatever.
Oh so, yeah, anyway. Therapy Brainstorm. It's like my favorite interaction. It's wonderful.
So I'll give my answer, which. When we talk about the purpose of the Legacy ban list, one thing we have to keep in mind is Wizards is not really incentivized to make Legacy good. They don't sell a lot of packs off Legacy. They run... Next year, we're getting 3 Legacy GP, or 4 Legacy GP. We're getting more than we've ever had. And it still pales in comparison to standard, limited, modern.
Well, I think the thing that
Wizards... So I think their point is... They don't need to gain Legacy players, but they need to not lose a substantial number of Legacy players. So rather than making people happy, they need to make sure they don't make people angry. So Top is one of those a lot of people were probably starting to get angry. Survival is one of those a lot of people are starting to get angry. The Delve spells, people are getting angry. Are people angry about having to play Deathrite Shaman right now?
I don't think they're at the level of Sensei Divining Top yet. I think it could be, especially if Grixis Delver just continues to be, one of the best decks in the format for, and a dominant market share for like the next 6 months or something. I could see that being a problem. But I think we're only like 4 months removed from the top end. Should give it some time to.
And we kind of get to many different points that we've made today that we need to move a lot slower in Legacy.
Yeah, I mean, there just aren't that many data points, and online is skewed compared to paper substantially.
Well, especially with the new algorithm for collecting online.
It's garbage.
They have the ability to substantially modify the information that we're presenting.
Which is really frustrating because the goal is to make standard harder to solve. I would much prefer they tiered it and made standard harder to solve, or withhold information there. But in Legacy, I think it's probably
the example I gave in our group chat today was Julian has 5-0'd twice with elves. Bara has 5-0'd. Sorry, it's not topping. Has 5-0'd with 2 different decks, and neither of them were featured. And these are decks that are outside of the norm. One of them, Sylvan Plug. I mean, honestly, without googling it, can you tell me what the fuck that deck does? How is that not a featured deck?
The Mono Green Chalice choke deck.
4 Sylvan Library is all I know. So.
And the other was the Judge's Familiar Bant deck, which has been called Bara Bant. He has a different name for Noblefish is what he calls it.
Noblefish.
That's another one. I would, if that popped up on the top 32, I'd just like Bara came up with a list that showed up 5-0. I'm playing that again because that deck is so much fun.
It's probably awesome.
But the average person isn't following these people on Twitter, isn't watching their streams. Yeah. They're just looking at the top 32. They don't know this deck exists.
Yeah. No, exactly. Yeah, so I think banning Deathrite, especially on this announcement, would be pretty premature. But
yeah,
it's
I think
definitely
we're all on the same page in that regard.
So we're saying at soonest, the banning after Eternal Weekend.
I would say so. Yeah.
Will the Eternal Weekend results substantially change that? So, for example, if Deathrite Shaman is a reasonable amount of the metagame, will they still ban? If it's too much, I think they will ban. But if it's about where people think it should be, will they still ban it anyway?
So I think one thing, which is just a little bit sidetracked, but it does answer. It is answering your question. It's a little bit roundabout, but I think one thing that Wizards is realizing, and even Star City, is that these team events are actually fantastic, and that people have the highest level of enjoyment from them. People are really excited to travel to go play them. They make for great coverage because you have a pretty big diversity of things that you can show on coverage versus like standard where you're seeing the same like 3 decks running.
Versus standard where I am not going to tune in.
Sure. Or like
Legacy where a standard player is not going to tune in.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that the thing is like, if it becomes an issue of coverage where we want like a diverse kind of team style coverage, which I think Wizards has been shifting to over the last 5 years anyway.
Especially again, going back to Pro Tour 25 is coming up.
Yeah, Pro Tour teams. Like, I mean, this was like, I remember I hadn't seen a Pro Tour in like 3 years. I turn them on and it's like, oh yeah, there's teams of 6 people and they all have like things that they're doing. Like, that's weird. I didn't really think about that. But yeah, no. So the idea is like, if the whole team aspect of Magic viewership is something that Wizards wants to emphasize, which I think they do.
Yeah, I mean, like I can imagine Pro Tour 25. I honestly can imagine calling a bunch of y'all to come over and drink beer and watch the Pro Tour like I would for the Super Bowl.
Yeah, which exactly. Pro Tour is that?
That's I think
Pro Tour 25.
June, I think it's June, right?
Yeah, I think it's
the summer.
Yeah.
Okay. Sure. Yeah.
So if I'm Wizards, what I don't want to see in the Pro Tour, especially on the Legacy part, is seeing Grixis Delver like match against itself like 80 times.
Well, and they do have the power because the Pro Tour plays so many rounds. They have the power to, in the initial rounds, kind of hide how much each deck is taking up in the format. I mean, but if the top 8 is all Grixis, they're gonna have egg on their face.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that they're really. That's something they care very strongly about. So I think if Grixis continues to perform at this level, I think it's very likely you'll see something done about it before Pro Tour 25.
All right, so I've got ready for the next question. Do you have anything else before I go to the next question?
No, I agree with Arjune. Summed it up pretty well, I think.
This is a thing that y'all have heard me out loud think that I did not write on our points for today. But Dan, our now lone live viewer, says, this is an actual question I have. Why, all caps, do people want to ban good cards more than ever now? In the past, it was never as big an issue, but now it's one of the biggest discussions every day.
So I think the thing about that question is it depends in what format. I think the biggest ban arguments come from standard, where one card is just it's so good you have to play it. Like
let's stick to Eternal because that's what our team does, and let's stick especially to Legacy because that's what we're talking about.
I would argue that there isn't really. I don't think there's that many more people calling for bans compared to like 2 years ago. It's just bans. Like there has been a banning or a handful of bannings that have happened, so those cries seem like they're more likely to get answered. Do you know what I mean? I think it's more something like that than. People are always complaining and always want.
You're saying there's a perception that cries for banning are more heard now than ever.
I think that's it more so than more people actively calling for bans for everything. That'd be my guess, but I'm not really sure.
Sean?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely what Arjune said. I think there's some truth to that. With the advent of the internet as well, we definitely tend to have like more fleshed out, like optimized lists, as opposed to like I'm gonna go to my store every week and play Legacy Weekly and try to find the best list. We now have like, thousands of people all around the country playing Grixis Delver and trying to find out, okay, are we playing 3 Volks or 2 Volks? Are we playing 3 UCs or 2, And so that problem sort of gets like, I mean, obviously the internet's been around for a long time, but I think those decks get figured out a lot sooner.
I want to use the exact same point but with the exact opposite goal. I think that you have, because, like I said, because of Star City not having as much coverage, because the information is reduced, people increasingly tend towards a certain number of decks. So instead of saying, you know, what beats Grixis, they say, how many Volks do I play? I think that I think that is a big part of it. I think that, like you said, the internet is more available. I think there's a much lower, what's the word? There's a much lower cost to entry to complain about the BNR list. So as some examples, who doesn't have a Reddit account? There's a Magic subreddit. You don't have to create an account on a specific forum to go bitch about the BNR list. The source has gotten bigger than ever. The Mana Drain, when I joined the Mana Drain, you had to ask to join. You didn't have to fill out an application or anything. It was just, hey, I want to join the Mana Drain, and they would go, here's your username. And now you can just log in, and now there are 3 different BNR threads. So I think the cost to entry in complaining is lowered. I think, as I've said a couple times, I think the impetus to innovate is lowered, and the combination of those two means that people are more likely to call for a ban, and that call is likely to be louder.
Interesting point. One thing that did cross my mind, and Arjune said he started Legacy about 2 or 3 years ago.
Something like that.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat, and so I'm not sure what Dan is asking about in terms of, like, is he referring to, like, the last 2 or 3 years? Is he talking about, like, compared to pre-survival era or something?
Well, and like, as an example, survival is the first banning that I lived through in Legacy, so that's tells you how long I've been playing.
Doesn't matter.
And I hated playing against survival, but I was just like, 2 Pithing Needle main is okay, and you can just, like, beat them on all these other fronts. Like, you have Graveyard Hate and all this other stuff. And I think it seems to me that until at least the Treasure Cruise era, there was much more, how do we fight this? And now there's increasingly, the way that we fight this is banning it. And,
so
there's also an argument that maybe it's just, you know, crotchety old men who they want to be able to play their deck. They want to play the same deck they've played for 10 years. And, you know, with Legacy and Vintage being eternal formats, I can at least understand why one might have that argument.
So the other thing that I guess thought about right now is that Modern has a very sculpted ban list from Wizards, and they're very aggressive about maintaining metagame diversity in that format. And so I think bannings were much more of a rare occurrence, you know, in the early 2000s compared to now, for the same reason. Right? I mean, in Standard, what was banned? It was like Skull Clamp. Cool. I don't know if anything else in Mirrodin Block was actually banned. But whatever. Oh, Artifact.
I think I've still got the timeline of bans up. But yeah, it's.
Yeah, but I mean, but they were done very.
If you look at the history of it, it's. I'll pull it up now, but I believe we had the standard bans of
2003 or something.
Yeah, hold on, I'm still in 95. I'm control Fing really hard. But okay, you had in 2004 Skull Clamp. Okay. The next ban was 2011 Jace and Stoneforge.
Yeah, exactly. They happened so far apart.
So that's a 7-year difference. The next one after that was Emrakul, which is that's 6 years. So we're decreasing. Maybe it's that I've been playing this time, but it feels a lot more recent. And and then January we had Emrakul and Smoker and Reflector Mage banned. And then the next banning, we had another standard banning. So maybe it's just people becoming more used to banning as a solution to the problem.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason is Modern is just, you know, extended with every deck having something banned from it originally. And then
I have a whole Modern extended rant. I have so many rants.
A very groomed ban list in Modern, right? You know, Wizards is not shy about banning, you know, 40 cards in Modern. Whatever. That's just what they're going to do.
Well, and it kind of seemed like in the last couple of Modern bannings, it was, do you want Modern to be a Pro Tour format? If so, we are going to groom it. If not, that's fine. It won't be a Pro Tour format. We can let you run wild.
Yeah, and okay, to be fair, Modern, in my opinion, Modern is just like the most casual of formats in terms of the amount of play to that. But yeah, whatever. No, I mean, it's a format where you can just brew whatever you want because the card pool is pretty huge. And your decisions don't really matter in the game most of the time. That's my opinion of Modern. That's most people I think feel differently, but whatever.
Sure. This is an internal podcast. I think you're not alone in thinking that, at least.
So Yeah, a lot of things are just like kind of written. It's like, oh, this is a bad matchup. I'm going to lose unless you just draw the Stone Cold. Like, you know.
I mean, do you remember the argument that there should be 20 card sideboards in Modern?
Yeah, it's like.
I was super stoked about that. I was like, cool. By extension, 25 in Legacy and 30 in Vintage. You just get to play 2 different Vintage decks.
Yeah. Transform Dredge into Shops, please.
So the last question we had on here, and Sean put this on here, and we didn't discuss it much, so I'm kind of excited to see. So
Pause for a second, though.
Pause.
I did want to go back a little bit to Dan's question. As far as why, like, more recent, like, you say that, like, I guess the assertion is that, like, bannings have been clamored for more recently, and sort of your rebuttals to that, you brought up the anecdote of you bringing, like, 2 Pithing Needles against Survival of the Fittest type decks.
Which I also, earlier in this podcast, said means there's a problem.
Right. Yeah. Here's the thing, though. Can you imagine any sort of solution like that, where you're bringing, like, 1 mana colorless artifacts in order to fight, I guess, these Deathrite shells, or before
a glorified Birds of Paradise? At least when I was bringing Pithing Needle in against Survival, I was bringing it in against their win condition, not their turn 1 play that they don't have to have.
Right. So, sort of the point I'm getting at is, like, maybe power creep is a little bit more real than people realize.
I think that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's like, I mean, even stuff like Leovold was printed like less than a year ago. Like, if you like stop and look at that card, it's kind of nuts how relevant that card is.
One of the jokes I've had with some of the guys is like, it used to be spells are powerful. Now it's creatures that are powerful. Look at most Eternal decks. The creatures are new border. The spells are old border.
Right.
Yeah, except for.
And so like that's.
What are old bordered cards that only have old borders that are played in like Legacy? Like Goose, maybe, and.
Well, but I mean, in general, like Brainstorm. Yes, there's a new border. Most people are playing.
Yeah, no, but like originally an old border card. Yeah.
Right.
And if you look at it like that, I mean, there's a Fatal Push, Ponder,
Nice Whispers,
Night's Whisper.
Yeah.
Path.
All right, so are you ready for my final question, Sean?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's hear it.
All right, so I don't know exactly what you meant by this, so I'm kind of excited to dive into it. We're also at 90 minutes now, so I suspect we won't be diving very deep into it. You wrote, Is Legacy a Pillars format? Now, I'll go ahead and tell you what I think you meant by that, which is Vintage traditionally has very much been considered a Pillars format. Your pillars are Workshop, Bazaar of Baghdad, Mana Drain, and after that it's kind of an argument, basically, over whether or not something like, White Eldrazi is a Workshop deck, even though it doesn't play Workshop. Oh, and Dark Ritual, that's the 4th one.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, like, I don't play too much Vintage. I was kind of asking around. I was asking you guys a couple of weeks ago about that because I couldn't really find anything on it online. I've heard of Vintage described as like a Pillars format before, but like, I see you guys playing Vintage sometimes, and it's just like
the article from which the Pillars spring is from a BBS. You were going to have to go way back to find it. It's called The Schools of Magic.
Yeah, not about that life. So, but I guess I don't know. Yeah, so I put that on this. I put that on a sort of our outline, and it kind of got me thinking when you were saying like any sort of conversation that needs to be had about banning a card that is not Deathrite. Is that like, well, like it needs to presume that Brainstorm isn't going to be banned, and so it kind of got me thinking like, is there such a thing as cards being like grandfathered into the format? Like I could make the argument that Show and Tell is doing far more degenerate things than Deathrite ever would be, right? I don't necessarily agree with that, but I could make that argument. Same with like Brainstorm, and I think a lot of people would agree that Brainstorm's doing more degenerate things.
So I think we're going right back to diversity of strategies, because if we're going to talk about the pillars, I think they would be much more general right now. They would be Deathrite Shaman, like Stoneforge Mystic, maybe Thalia. You might just say Taxing.
Just Wasteland. I mean,
Wasteland goes in Deathrite Shaman. All of these things.
You mean like a specific strategy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
What do they say though? They say like Wasteland keeps the format in check. Force Will keeps the format in check. Brainstorm. Would you say that? I don't even know. I don't think it keeps the format in check.
It's too broadly applicable, I think.
I think it's like we've said. It doesn't define any deck. but it does define blue. I don't think people are going to stop. I don't think blue will stop being the most commonly played color without Brainstorm, but with Brainstorm, if you're going to play blue, you're going to really play blue.
Sure. So I guess kind of like backpedaling a little bit, let's hit rewind. Is a Brainstorm ban off the table?
I think that given history, it is off the table. I think if you asked in a vacuum with no history, I think that it would be totally reasonable. I think given history, it is not. I think the same thing about Workshop and Vintage. If Workshop wasn't $1,000, I think it would be totally on the table for a restriction.
Okay, sort of a follow-up to that, and it's something you brought up earlier. Really quickly, I want to get this out there. But you were talking about in Vintage, there's sort of this idea that, like, in order to make Workshop works, like, to make it worse in the meta, you need to ban Mental Misstep. And it's sort of like banning a card that's, like, tangentially related, but not necessarily the problem card itself.
Right.
Does that make sense? There's a lot of talk. People say, like, fetch lands are bad for the game. And it's interesting because, like, they're bad from a lot of perspectives in that, like, they enable these greedy mana bases that are just these piles of cards. They're also just really bad for, like, coverage purposes, which WotC has shown.
Well, I mean, if nothing else, I shuffle my deck, I present it to my opponent, they cut, I draw my opening 7, and then I immediately go search my deck.
Right, and that's, like, not really a fun thing to watch, you know? And sometimes people shuffle, whether they shuffle quicker or slower, I think we can all agree the game is just more fun to watch without people picking up their cards and shuffling them. That's not what we want to see on coverage.
Yeah, it's also a big issue. It was a bigger issue in Standard where you have to fetch like 9 times over the course of the game for each player because everyone floods out to like 12 lands.
See, the thing is, while I agree in principle with the idea of getting rid of fetch lands, they're not banning 10 cards. It's not happening.
Yeah, that's true.
Now, I could see, this is a thing that people have discussed, and this is a paradigm shift, duels and fetches restricted. I could see that. Yeah, it's an interesting idea, right? You could still play your same deck, but it gets a lot worse.
I even think Grixis Delver is probably still playable, even if fetches and duels are restricted.
I mean, yeah, you still play like 9 fetches.
Yeah, exactly. Most of your fetches can hit whatever duel you want, I'd say. I mean, you get all 4 islands, then you get like Wooded Foothills, and then Bloodstained Mire.
I mean, you probably play 18 lands, just 9 fetches, 9 duels.
No, you still play the Wastelands.
And Wastelands. 23.
Yeah. 18 lands total on the deck. 4 of them are just Stone Rains.
Yeah.
Fulminating Rage without the body.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I don't know. I love weird ideas like that, you know?
Yeah.
And I know we've kind of tossed around the idea of like Legacy Unleashed before. I would love to just play a tournament where like everyone goes into it like without any sort of idea what the meta's going to look like, you know? And something like that where we restricted all duels and fetches. Yeah, collection takes a huge hit, but at the same time, I'd be really curious to see where that goes.
And well, good news. That's the thing we have the ability to make happen. But yeah, I think the idea that shuffles cause the problem is both true and unfixable. It's like Brainstorm was unplayable garbage until Onslaught. It becomes very good then, but you're gonna ban 10 cards. Really, I don't think that's a realistic option. And I also don't think that at this point banning Brainstorm makes that significant a difference. You've still got Ponder, Preordain, and any number of other excellent cards. Sure.
I've noticed that, yeah, I agree. There's not really a way to ban 10 cards, but I think Deathrite Shaman becomes like a much bigger cost to running Deathrite if fetches aren't as prevalent as they are.
Oh, absolutely.
So banning all the fetches does make Deathrite worse.
I mean, right, you're still playing like Wastelands and stuff, you know?
Probably.
And they're also like the
God, and then you have to have 4 of every duel. God damn it, you're going to cost me so much money, Sean.
Weren't there those garbage fetches printed back in the day that come into play tapped? Or they fetch things that come into play tapped?
Yeah, they were also in Vintage Masters. The blue-black one is illustrated by Therese Nielsen. Yeah, the lands themselves come into play tapped, not the lands that you fetch for.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, and something like that I think would be like an acceptable
Evolving Wilds
alternative. I mean, Evolving Wilds for like non-basics, but yeah, basically Evolving Wilds.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, like, you know, for that reason, Deathrite would still be pretty good, not as prevalent. I don't think you'd see like these crazy mana bases where it's like, yeah, we play like 4 fetchable sources and like 12 fetches.
And on the opposite side of the spectrum, can you imagine a solution to Deathrite Shaman, a printable solution to Deathrite Shaman?
Fuck
I mean,
no.
there are so many one mana.
Well, destroy target creature that just targeted a card in a graveyard. Like that's not printable.
But the problem is there's so many one mana answers to Deathrite Shaman that are way more flexible, like swords, fatal push,
like shock.
Yeah, exactly. But it's
like Grape Shot with Storm count at 1 before you cast Grape Shot.
Yeah, these
guys,
like
what figured out. We just play Tarfire, right?
Yeah, it's like a trap card that you have to play for like 0 mana or something. If like someone targeted graveyard, it's free. I don't know.
Wait.
It feels really bad.
Mental misstep.
No, we're done.
Yeah, exactly.
that's not happening. We made everything worse. We just fucked with the format again.
Yeah,
if we have bad mental misstep.
I very sincerely think that the Deathrite Shaman abilities are okay if it can't be easily played by any deck playing dual lands. I think that's the issue. It's just it's too easy to cast for the effects that it has.
And this is one of the things we said in the first few
that.
minutes. If it just cost green, that would probably be a lot more even.
I love how we come full circle on this.
Well, I mean, all of these things come from each other.
Right.
Yeah, but like if you're going to try to make a solution to it, I think that's kind of roughly what it has to be. I'm
just thinking of like the next solution is Pithing Needle. Well, it's got to be better than Pithing Needle. Pithing Needle on legs that exists. What are you going to cast? What, a 1/1 Phyrexian Revoker? Maybe a 0/1. Maybe a 0/1. Will that be fair so that it can die in combat?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if Power Creep is real.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a tough situation.
Yeah. No, definitely agreed. And I think we had like a lot of like I don't want to say half-ass solutions, but we had a lot of like imperfect solutions. And I wouldn't, like, to be frank, I wouldn't be happy if anything we talked about today was just like, if I woke up tomorrow and like any one of these solutions was implemented. I think that would be a disaster.
Yeah, I think so too.
Who knows? Like, we acknowledge there's a problem, and maybe WotC will.
At that point, we should all acknowledge that most of us will be mad at whatever the solution is. So stay off the source on next Monday.
So the other thing that I was actually thinking about, this is like tangential at best, but for coverage, I think there's a general push toward interactive matchups. In general, for example, Star City does not like putting Storm or Belcher on coverage because for Storm especially, it's kind of hard to see what's going on. People are just making land drops and like pondering and stuff, and then all of a sudden they just go off.
Yeah, you kind of need everybody to be in a booth so they can explain what the fuck's going on.
Yeah, or there are creatures, and creatures are intuitive, right? Creatures like you look at a battlefield and it's like, oh, there's like a 3/1 and 2 2/2s, and the life totals.
And it seems to me generally when you see a deck like that on stream, it's the first feature match with the plan that it will be off camera soon.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I mean, I remember I was talking to Sky when he was having his big run with Ad Nauseam, and to be fair, again, it's modern, not legacy. But he was talking to Nick. He's like, "Hey, I'm like EXO. I'm playing an interesting deck. Everyone is on Death Shadow. Why am I not getting any like camera matches?" And he's like, "I just can't put. I just don't want to put Ad Nauseam on because you're literally just going to be drawing a bunch of cards, and then you either go off or you don't. And it makes for bad viewing, which I kind of agree with.
Mm-hmm.
If the goal is to actually get interested viewers, creatures are kind of the easiest way to do that. Unless you have someone who's like very interested in the format and is paying a lot of attention.
Well, and I think Legacy is that situation where, like, I mean, my Future Sight Miracles deck is the kind of thing that I could see someone putting on camera because they go, Future Sight 2? I want to know what that's about.
Yeah, sure.
And then I draw 12 cards in one turn and like, that's what that's about.
Yeah, but I think for like random standard viewer, they don't really care that you're like, oh, did he play the LED or not this turn? Like, what is he doing? You
also, like, with a random standard match, you can tune in, watch for 5 minutes, know what's going on, and tune out. And with a long control matchup, you tune in, some stuff gets countered, and then you leave, and you didn't gain anything.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's also why Miracles was also like not something Star City wanted to put on, because it was made for very not uninteresting. It was just so prevalent, right. So many good players were on it, but it made for bad viewing. That's why I think that's one reason why Delver decks are actually so popular, is because they get a disproportionate number of views on those kinds of medium. Even when Star City was showing Legacy every week, I think that Delver and Shardless Bug kind of decks got a really disproportionate amount of viewership compared to other decks in the format.
For sure.
For that exact reason, yeah.
Well, any other thoughts before we leave for the night?
I'm still angry.
Yeah.
I thought this would be cathartic. I'm upset at Deathrite Shaman and everything it stands for, and I just want to go back to playing Infect, but I don't know.
feel free to borrow 10 fins for the dual line tournament this weekend.
But
I can't be there. College football season starts.
Oh
yeah, I can't be there either.
Yeah.
But if you guys want to give me some good fantasy football advice, I'll take that instead.
Cash the pigskin and run away from your goalpost. I don't know how this works.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, the only really the closing thought I could have is strongly encouraging our listeners and viewers to solve the problem by fighting it, not by bitching about it.
Yeah, I think
my central thesis in our last episode on vintage community building was be the change you want to see. You want to see Deathrite not be good? Figure out a way to beat it.
Yeah, and it's not like Deathrite decks are unbeatable. Like thinking about Ben, like Chantel doesn't care about Deathrite Shaman usually. It just goes over the top, and there are ways to combat it beyond,
Right.
So
we should all just pick up elves, I think. I mean, I would be happy to see a shop full of elves.
Well, go talk to Brandon because he is fucking sick of losing with elves.
You know what? Okay, you know what? Thursday Legacy, I'm gonna play elves. You heard it here first. And I'm not. I don't know how this
I had to play against him. That we were talking about how disappointed he is with elves right now, and we were talking about it during the match, and then I just crushed him. He put like five dudes on one turn. I'm like, sure, no problem. Pass turn to you. Plays like 2 more dudes. Plays a Crater Hoof Behemoth. I'm like, brainstorm trigger.
You're playing Terminus.
God,
what is he doing?
Yeah.
Well, his plan was
watching that match.
I mean, and like you said, he was like, I had to go for it there, and you had it. So I don't know what I was supposed to do.
Maybe you should play some...
My heart was vicariously broken from watching that match.
Play some envelops maybe in elves? I don't know.
Oh, good. Well, I think that's about it for us. All right, well then, Goif announcements. Our good friend Stu Ziarnik, which I'm certain I pronounced incorrectly, just played in a modern PPTQ at Pat's Games. He's got a tournament report up on our website, lonestarlordgoifs.com. Next weekend is Vintage at Brash Brewing Company. $10 entry, 1 p.m., 100% proxy. Come and have fun. If you need a deck, shoot me a message at @thecraven1 on Twitter. Information for that is also on lonestarlordgoifs.com. And we have finalized a date. We do not have a time and location confirmed yet, but the first Lone Star Lurgoyf's road trip will be September 7th. We will be playing Vintage on our normal date, but in Austin, Texas. So plan on coming out for that. It looks like we're going to have a pretty good crowd. Between 4 and 8 of us are coming from Houston, and I've got at least 2 people confirmed coming from San Antonio. So should be a good crowd.
Is that on a Saturday?
Yes.
Okay.
Our goal is Saturday 1 p.m. so that people from Houston or even Dallas can wake up at a reasonable time, drive down, spend Saturday night in Austin, and head home.
That sounds like a lot of fun. I can't make that event, but I might just drive down to Austin and hang out with you guys that night.
Yeah, I'm heading out Friday night to hang out with some friends, and then wake up very hungover and play some Vintage, which is code for play Vintage the way I always do.
Can I just say, like, to all the Austin people who host tournaments, every single Legacy tournament I've played in Austin has been on a Sunday. And, like, I get that Saturday is, like, the primetime slot or whatever, but,
college football, bro. You teaming.
Sure, but, like, I can't make it...
It's like you said, Saturday is the prime time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't make it, like, to a Legacy tournament, like, on Sunday. Like, wake up, drive there, come back in the same week.
You can make it to there. You cannot make it back.
Yeah.
This is true. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. That's, again, another one of the rants I have, and Austin especially is really bad about this. But it's really hard to travel to a Sunday tournament. So.
Yeah. Maybe they don't want us. Who knows?
Yeah, well, check our website, check our Twitter. Thanks for listening. We will have all those details up ASAP. Don't ban Deathrite.
Don't ban Deathrite, guys. Don't do it.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
All right.